Wood Harris,
How you doing?
welcome to VladTV.
Man, thank you for having me.
Huge fan, man. You play some of the, you've been in some of the most iconic movies, and TV shows out there. When you talk about Paid in Full, The Wire, New Edition, New Edition biopic, Above the Rim.
Remember the Titans?
Remember the Titans?
Jimi Hendrix, don't forget.
That's right, and the Jimi Hendrix, the first Jimi Hendrix biopic. Exactly, man. Congratulations,
Thank
man.
you.
Great success. So let's start in the beginning. You grew up in Chicago.
I grew up in Chicago, west side of Chicago.
Okay. What was Chicago like, when you were growing up?
Not too different than it is now. Gang culture.
Yeah.
Deceptive political culture. But different times, so the drug culture was different in terms of the social drug thing. It was kind of like the inception of crack when I was a kid. It was pre-crack, and crack changed the whole thing. And
Sure.
you know what I mean? And but even now, I think the drug culture with all the drugs kids use so young, we were young, it just wasn't that way. Cats might have did something, but there's a whole world of drugs. I think it really does influence behavior quite a bit. And so my recollection of Chicago is just friendlier than it is now, even though I think the crime rate was similar, 900 deaths a year or whatever it was.
Well, when you were growing up there, because you have like the Black Disciples, the Gangster Disciples, and then at one point you had Larry Hoover, Jeff Fort, who were running that whole thing. Were you around while they were still out, or were they already in jail by the time you were a kid?
I think, well, I was around, but I was very young, and then they went to jail, and there was, it's like taking the head of the snake off, and now it's just a wiggly body, and it's like that now. There's no leadership even in crime. You still need, an orchestrator above it all. So without it, you just have the young vigilantes. It's wild. Shoot them up, and it's kind of drug induced. So it's just, it's kind of all bad right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird. Over the last few years, Chicago has become a bit of a, Chirac and things like that, making sense out of names like that. So.
Well, I know, some of the guys I interviewed in Chicago, they told me about how at one point the projects were actually torn down, and then all the people from the projects were kind of placed, spread out, and then they were used to selling drugs and operating a certain type of way, so they took that mentality into the surrounding areas, and that kind of made everything worse.
Definitely, I think once you you get rid of the organized crime leaders, so they're in jail. Now the younger underlings are wild, and then those buildings were torn down, and those areas were basically gentrified. So Cabrini Green is like, that area is now top real estate.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so it
Cabrini
was
Green.
There was a plan with that.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The whole city. It's kind of like what Jay-Z said about, the projects. They were projects, like experiments.
Yeah.
And Chicago is a red line city where even the Polish people are over here, and the Italian, everyone is separated, or it was that way. It's a little more intermingled now. But when I was growing up, it was a red line city, very much so. So, you would have different Latin cultures in one neighborhood, but they would be somewhat separated. It's a big Puerto Rican culture there, and Mexican culture. I think the Mexican culture is maybe a little smaller than the Puerto Rican culture there. Wouldn't you say? Mexican culture? So, that being the case, it's always been a city segregated politically, and I think that causes certain tension too, because there's no sense of camaraderie among people, So, and we live in the oddest of times nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, so weird to even be doing even an interview now with the climate of American sentiment and things like that.
Exactly.
It's pretty bizarre, Vlad.
Now, as a kid, did you ever get mixed up in any of the street stuff, or were you pretty much?
You couldn't avoid getting mixed up in the street stuff. I was blessed that, I had an older brother I have an older brother. People know who my older brother is, Steve Harris.
Yeah,
And,
the actor.
The actor. And he took a lot of the shots, metaphorically speaking, figuratively speaking, okay, that I may have taken. He was the proverbial big brother, you know. But you couldn't avoid the gang fare. It wasn't something that you even thought about avoiding. So it was like you step outside, you're in the world. It wasn't like there was no negotiating of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to be no full-on gangbanger or nothing like that, you know. Also, I'm a basketball player at the time, so
Right.
it used to be. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but if you were seen to have some kind of athletic talent, cats who was in that world,
Right.
the drugs or gangs and stuff, they would give you a pass.
They give you a
like,
pass,
no,
right.
So I don't even know if it's like that so much, but back then I was in that world like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was covered up. What was that basketball documentary?
Hoop Dreams.
Hoop Dreams. Yeah.
I went to that high school.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yes, and I lived in the neighborhood, that same neighborhood you see Arthur A.G. in. Yeah, I went to the high school that Isaiah Thomas played ball for, because
Right.
we all thought we was gonna go play basketball. And I went to the grade school, the grammar school of Isaiah Thomas. And
Nice.
I know his family. And so we all thought, as young people, basketball was just such a, you know, it just felt like you could do it, all right?
Yeah.
And music too, hip hop too. So hip hop and basketball at that time just became just life, man.
Yeah,
Just
everything.
life. Yeah, it was life. Even be above school, you know,
Sure.
like it was what you built your life on. So
Now, your dad was a bus driver, and your mom was a seamstress,
yeah,
and I guess an occasional
she
substitute
did
teacher,
teaching and stuff
Which-
of that nature.
which you said in your own words adds up to no money.
I said that.
You said that.
That's a fact, though. You know, you're not. Gonna
Yeah, I
have
mean,
too
you look
much
at those
money.
two professions.
Yeah, ain't no money coming in. And plus,
Yeah.
my dad at the time was more, you know, from that era of gambling and stuff, you know. But the fact is, I can talk about my dad, being with my dad. How many interviews have you done where the guy's like, yo, so my dad, so my mother and father. So the biggest thing about me and my brother probably is that I wouldn't say we had a nuclear family, because it was too, you know, it's good times nuclear. It was too a mixture of good times and like, it was not a nuclear family, okay? But my dad was there. He just
Yeah.
inspired me to think I can just do anything. You know what I'm saying? So that's really my saving grace. My father's deceased now, but
Rest in peace.
yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've talked about with a lot of the people I've interviewed, is that when you have these homes where you have no man in the house, and you're raised around women, your mother, your grandmother, your aunts, and so forth, you have young boys growing up knowing the emotional side of things, but not knowing the logical masculine side of things. They grow up to be emotional men and start
That's a
to
good
act.
point. I never thought about it that
Yeah.
way, but that's a good point. I do believe you're right. I think
Yeah, 'cause
that
I grew up with a father as well,
Yeah.
so I compared
it
to some of my
makes you-
friends.
right, exactly. I know exactly what you mean, because all of my friends are without that. I have
Right.
maybe one or two who literally grew up knowing their dad. You know, most of my friends weren't in the same situation that I was in. But I believe you're right. I think that those formative years where the little boy is a non-developed gender sort of identifying person. He might be a male, but he's going to identify with feminine things if those are the things I think that dominate his formative years of development. So they might not be necessarily gay, but they end up feminized, like you said, emotional. And
Well, I don't really mean feminized so much. I mean, like, when you come into conflict, you might be overly emotional in that conflict. You might react a certain type of way, more of how a woman reacts, screaming, yelling, which leads to violence and so forth. And, you know, in certain ways, people compare that with some of the problems of certain communities. It's like when the father's not around, you have men who are overly emotional that turns into bigger problems.
Right. I don't know if I agree with you there, Vlad.
Okay.
I think
Fair
that
enough.
there's too many different personalities of women. And yes, you could say that women are emotional, but
But a woman,
all the boys are typically raised by a woman. So in every case, the primary caretaker, even if the dad is there, is a woman. A lot of times the dad is not giving you paternal information. The maternal side is so dominant in those formative years. You know, you do need some emotion. You do have to have some emotional. So you get some of it anyway. It's necessary for you to be able to. But I understand what you're saying. They don't necessarily have control, and they don't have the masculine side of it.
Well, here's another part. When I talk about, you know, guys who are raised without their mother, is when it's time to look for a father figure, they find it from the OGs, the streets.
Yeah, a lot of times.
And this is who they look up to, so they start to emulate that type of behavior.
Definitely.
You see what I'm saying? So then now you're creating a cycle of this type of thing as well. You see what I'm saying?
I agree. I think that, you know, it's probably something like, you know, little boy, he's around his mom, his sister, his aunt, and her friends, and it's nothing but her, she, nothing but women, and a little boy or two. So, you know, he might emulate a little bit. She's switching, he's switching a little bit. She's doing stuff, he's doing it, and not thinking nothing of it. And the mother herself might not really even, she might laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So in the psyche of that kid, he might be like, oh, I did that? Like when he gets a little older, he may, I was doing that? He might not be soft even at that point, but he might just have that in his recollection, his memory, right? So next thing you know, I gotta toughen up. I need to toughen up. I really don't even like he might think to himself, I don't even like having it in my background, in my thoughts that I was, you know, at all.
Yeah.
So then you're OG now. It's kind of like cats who sometimes it'll be an actor will end up in a sitcom or something. You hear about these guys every so often. They oh, y'all think I'm soft because I'm in a sitcom? And they might shoot up a club or something because, you know, whatever. I ain't soft no more, you know.
Right.
So, but I think I partly agree with you in terms of, I do believe that I just wouldn't cast every situation as that. I just wouldn't say that it's, I just wouldn't generalize women to think that, oh, they're going to give up the bursting emotion so much so that the kid will do it also. So I just think that it's, you know, it wavers basically.